screams in the night. Indian legends. Miles of footprints. Sightings. What are these elusive hominids that stalk the wilderness? Join us for eyewitness accounts, questions and answers, Bigfoot encounters of the past, and ongoing encounters in the present. Your host, two-time witness, field researcher for 43 years, William Jevning. Welcome to the mystery. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Creek Devil. We have Rob with us today. Rob, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you doing?
Very good, very good. Well, we're just going to hand you the microphone. Tell us what you've experienced and we'll go from there.
All right, sounds good. Well, my first encounter was in the early 80s, I think 1980, I believe. In my hometown of Balsett. It's a small coastal, well, in the rain shadow of the Coast Range in Central Oregon, not Central Oregon, Central Oregon coast. It was a company-owned town that no longer exists, but there had been supposedly over 60 reported sightings up there in that area, but 59 of them were from one guy, so you can't really count that. But my encounter, after we had a deluge of rain for a while, a buddy of mine, a next door neighbor, we went on a bicycle ride and we rode east out of town, and we got about a little less than a mile outside of town, and it connects with the road that loops around the lake that circles the valley that this Balsett was in. And it's kind of a T intersection, and if you imagine coming from the bottom of the T right through the top of the T into where, there shouldn't be a road, there was actually an old Jeep trail that was between the trees, and you just kind of busted through the ditch and you went off into the forest, and we had jumped through that ditch and came to a mud puddle almost immediately after, getting into the trees. And so we slammed on the brakes and looked up, and about 10 yards away at max, probably closer to 25 feet or so, was this Sasquatch walking away from right to left, and it was about not directly away, but kind of at that angle, going in front of me, or us. And my buddy and I just kind of sat there and looked at it, jaws dropped, and amazed. We got to see it for a good 5-7 steps or so, maybe 10 seconds. It was really extraordinary. It's something that I've not ever been able to suppress. The only break I really got from thinking about Bigfoot was puberty. Other than that, it's been a pretty much constant thought in my mind. But we saw this thing, and it was walking, like I say, up this Jeep trail, and it appeared to be walking inside the ruts, like it was hiding its footprints for some strange reason. But we didn't think of that at the time, thought of that later when we realized how intelligent these things actually are, from listening to guys like you, Ms. Jevning. And it appeared to, the lighting was really interesting that day. I saw it in basically 3 different lighting scenarios where it was backed by a darker background, then it went through a lighter background. It seemed like the hair kind of matched whatever it was walking by. And one of the last steps that it took, it stepped into a beam of sunlight, and it hit the shoulder of this thing, and there was an explosion of colors, and the browns suddenly turned to blondes and reds, and it was really intriguing. It was like the color of deer, the color of bark, the color of the needles on the forest floor. It was a combination of everything. It was really, really extraordinary. We never really talked about it. We did the talks with our parents, of course, and we were shut down, not really believed because we were so young or whatever. And they believe me now, though. Well, and we didn't really talk about it until 30 years later at a town reunion where we saw each other and we beelined for each other and stepped aside and spoke discreetly. And he goes, "Did we really see that?" And it's kind of made me laugh because I was thinking the same thing. I've always wanted to talk to him about it. And in fact, I tried to get a hold of him on Facebook, but no reply, and I couldn't get him to talk about it that day any more than what had happened. You know, what we had talked about, just like that we actually saw it, and I really like to, confirm with him all the thoughts that I have that I remember, the details that I remember. So, and that leads me to like possibly a second encounter, or it could have been a something left over from the first. I'm not sure if it was a nightmare or not, but my brothers and I shared a bedroom, and we had bunk beds, and these bunk beds were hanging from the ceiling on chains, kind of funny. And anyway, my bunk bed was at the level of the window, and I always laid with my head by the window and looked outside. And apparently I woke up screaming, saying there was a Sasquatch in the window or something like that. You know, there's a big scary thing in the window. And my older brothers tried to calm me down, and they said that it was our uncle who apparently was out there in a gorilla mask trying to scare us. It was a prank. But that was just lip service, according to, by my theories, because I talked to my brother about it a couple years ago, and that's the conclusion that I came to, because my uncle denied that he had any part of being in a gorilla mask out there. So it might have been a nightmare, or it could have been a Bigfoot in the window. I don't really know, because I've never seen the face of the Sasquatch, but I've had a few dreams where I get a glimpse of one, and then I'm terrorized. So I wake up.
So you still
where
get,
should I go?
What's that? Quick question. You still get nightmares to this day from time to time. Is that what you're saying?
Well, occasionally nowadays, yeah, occasionally. I'd say it's maybe once or twice a year now, but originally it was quite often. It really affected my sleeping habits. I couldn't sleep by a window for a long, long time. My poor sister, I'd go into her room and pull down all of her clothes in her closet and sleep under them. And she'd pick them up every morning, hang them back up like a good trooper.
Yeah, well, we hear that from time to time. People, they see these things, and it has an effect on them, sometimes lifetime.
Yeah, I would say it's had a detrimental effect on me. I really wish it could have been one of those sightings where it could have been something different, like the road sighting or a night sighting or something from 75 yards or 50 yards away. That there could be a misidentification, I guess, in those scenarios. But this was unobstructed view from so close in the daytime, and it was undeniable. There's no mistaking for a bear. This thing had shoulders. This thing had long legs. This thing had fingers, and you could see everything, the feet, and it was undeniable. So I've never been able to shake it. I probably should get some counseling over, because it really has affected my life a lot. I am so obsessed with it that it's borderline insanity.
Hey, Rob, when you saw it walking away, did it look back at you and your friend at all?
No, not at all. I've never seen the face. I didn't notice any ears. All I noticed was, that it had a head. I can't say that it was conical, but because the way I looked at it as walking away, I started out at an overall view of it. Then I looked down the right side, because the leg was moving and the hands came back. The arms swung back, and I saw fingers. And then as it went back the other way, took another step or two, and then it hit that light, and all the colors just jumped out at me. And I don't even remember the bicycle ride home. There was the incident, and then the parents, and then the either the dream of a Sasquatch in the window, or there actually being a Sasquatch in the window, whichever it was. I don't know.
Rob, how old were you when this happened?
What's that?
How old were you when this happened?
10 years old.
Oh, okay. All right. So you
I was, very, very young.
How about when you had the nightmare, where you're in your bunk bed and you may have seen one in the window? How old were you then?
That had to have been before 1982, because that's when my oldest brother left and went into the Army. So I believe, though, it was right around this. I think it was the same year, but I can't swear to that. I'm pretty sure it was the same year, though.
Okay.
Now, Rob, Rob, after this happened, did you end up going back to that site anytime soon after, or even since then?
Not soon after, but quite a few years later, I had gone there with my brother and had a little scary scenario happen. And we got there, and I'm a little bit nervous, thinking, we were deer hunting, and we just got off the road, parked the vehicle, and started to do our hunt, and the force just started sounded like a bulldozer was coming through the trees, knocking down trees, and it ended up being a rather large herd of elk that came stampeding down Fennel Ridge down into the valley and made quite a racket. I don't know if you've ever been in the woods when that happens, but it's startling. It's you actually get pretty concerned because you don't know what's coming at you, and it sounds big. And when it's a herd of them and they're on the run, they don't stop for anything. They go through everything, and it was pretty terrifying. So we hunkered down under a log and hid, and they eventually went away, and we survived, of course. But it was really pretty scary. And I don't think I've been back there other than that one time. Not that exact spot. I'd been camping up there a few times and had some weird things happen, like some coyotes came in and circled the camp, for like a half hour, and were really, really local. But I can't attribute that to anything. It was just a weird thing because coyotes don't usually do that, and they don't usually run in packs. They're usually by themselves, I think, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they can be. I've seen them more often than not. That's a good question. I usually see them by themselves, but out in the desert, I've heard where they, late at night they'll catch a rabbit or something, and then you hear a whole bunch of them yipping as they're eating.
Interesting.
Yeah, that'd be a good question for a biologist. And quick question: How close were the elk when they ran by?
I think at the closest, 10 feet. They were really, really close. Yeah, we were hunkered under a big log that was probably about 4 feet tall. It was an old growth log that was on its side and had moss growing on it. It was rotting. And we literally laid under as far as we could and pulled moss over us, and they got in real close. Real close.
Did they have racks?
Oh, yeah. That they did. They were actually the state record was got out of Valsets for quite a long time. It was my next door neighbor who had gotten this thing. And I remember as a child standing up inside the rib cage of this elk. It was so big. I forget the spread or the dimensions on it, but I believe it was a 7-pointer, but it had a huge spread on it, and they were uniform and beautiful. It was a really nice animal.
Hey, Rob, going back to the Sasquatch for a minute, if you were to describe it physically, you talked about the colors, but in terms of how big it was and how tall it was, if you had to estimate, what would you say? I know you were only 10 at the time, but...
I would say it was a patty. It was 7.5 feet and, over 500 pounds for sure. The ankles, or not ankles, the lower part of the calf were as thick as my thighs. It was a really thick animal. That was the more startling. The thing about it was its width and its depth. The height was one thing, but when you see it all together, it's a whole other story. You just can't imagine it. It's you really have to see one for yourself to understand what goes through your mind. The primal fear and the way it affects you is tremendous.
Were you and your friend kind of in just a state of shock or
Absolutely.
or fear, or both, I guess?
I wouldn't say necessarily fear. I'm sure we were scared, but it was not. It didn't acknowledge us per se because it was just walking away. So, if it would have been looking at us or anything like that, that would have left us the thought that it sees us. It knows we're here or whatever. So I guess at the time we kind of assumed that it might not have seen us, but there's no way that it didn't see us. We were too close, and two kids riding the bicycles out in the forest aren't exactly quiet. We weren't very quiet. So I'm pretty sure it knew we were there, but no perceived threat at the time, but terribly frightened afterwards, for years. still today, I was only able to hunt for like 5 years, and I just don't feel comfortable going out by myself, and hunting with other people was kind of, it's just not my style. I like to go out and go on a walk,
Yeah.
So,
And, you had mentioned that your mom and your dad or your parents didn't believe you at first, but did you say they now believe you?
absolutely, yeah. Yeah, they believe me now. They trust me now, But back then I was a young child, so of course, children have imaginations, and that's probably too fantastic for them to comprehend at the time. But there's enough evidence out there that you really have to be kind of bullheaded or unable to learn if you can't put all the pieces of the puzzle together. There's so much anecdotal evidence, and there's even empirical evidence out there. So it's not whether Bigfoot exists or not. It's just whether people will accept it, whether cognitive dissonance will allow them to comprehend that creature is really there and it walks like us and is almost as smart or maybe smarter than us in some manner.
Yeah, Rob, just by chance, have your parents or any of your other family members had an experience themselves?
No, none of them have had any encounter. In fact, I was talking to my oldest brother again yesterday about it, and his statement was, with all this technology, why haven't we come across them on game photos or something like that? And then, of course, my rebuttal was, well, they have. It's just whether people accept it or not. There's some pretty good footage out there.
Right.
The officer who showed the clip of one burying the game cam, I thought that was pretty intriguing. That looked pretty interesting. The hair looked pretty real to me.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with that one?
Not offhand. But afterwards, did you tell? Because you said that you didn't tell anyone at first, but or you didn't tell your family at first, but did you tell any of your classmates at the time?
No, not that I remember. Bigfoot was kind of like a subject up there because there had been a situation where Lindsay Wagner had came up and they were going to scout the area in the 70s for a part 2 of Bionic Man with Bigfoot, but it never panned out because they were canceled and they weren't going to use the Palisades as a site anyway because there were power lines everywhere and it wasn't aesthetically pleasing. It wasn't what they wanted to go with. So, and we had a camp scenario where the school had sponsored a camp out, and we were in a cabin, and the upperclassmen who were chaperoning decided to prank us with a gorilla mask and come barging in the thing and barging into the room at night and scaring everybody. And
yeah.
It seems like Bigfoot comes up in my life every 5 years or so. There's something that makes me go, huh.
Yeah. Now, have you heard about any activity in that area since then, in the years since in that area?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's tons of reports on, that you can find online regarding those sets or Polk County, or they say west of Dallas, Oregon, or by Grand Ron. It's all the same forest from Grand Ron all the way down to, let's say, like Corvallis or so. It's pretty much all no paved roads, just all forest land. And there's a couple of rivers that come out of there, and hundreds of creeks are up there, tons and tons of springs, which reminds me of Cold Springs, which was at the top of Fano Peak, and that was the high point going into the town from the valley. And in 2008, I was driving for Walmart, and I had just purchased a King Quad, and I brought that up to the mountain, and it was it was after midnight. It was early morning, and I picked up my buddy next door and took him up there, and we went riding, and I got the bejeebers scared out of me that night. You know how you kind of sense, you have a sense that he's around or it's around when you've seen it. You kind of get this radar, I guess. Have you ever experienced that, Will?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Why do you think that is? Why are we predisposed to feel them? I mean, I don't get that.
I don't think it's just them. I mean, lots of people, get the sensation of being watched when people are around or other animals are around. So I think it's just something that, I don't know what the cause is, but I think it's fairly common.
Well, it seems to be more intense when they're around. I mean, I've been stalked by cougar, and that's not really, it's not a fun thing, but it's not just their presence seems to give me the willies. You know, it really makes me feel uncomfortable. It's only happened, you know, maybe 7 or 8 times in my life that I really felt their strong presence, but it's terrifying. You know, all of a sudden you just want to leave. You know, you don't want to have anything to do with that, where you're at or what you're doing. You just want to vacate, disengage, get away. But back to the quad story, I'd gone for a ride and had some interesting stuff happen. I had that sense that it was that something was around. And when my buddy had gone for a ride himself, I was trying to get agitated because it was gone for a while. And so I walked to the edge of the landing up the top of the cold springs, right by where the spring comes out of the mountain. And I hear this low kind of growl grunt and a tree snap or a branch breaking that really sounds like a rifle going off. I've heard people relate that to, you know, that sound to a rifle going off, and it really is. It's that loud. It's really amazing. If you've had one happen very close to you, it scares the heck out of you. I had no desire to stay there at the point. I just jumped in the truck and and went down the mountain to find him and got out of there.
Yeah, good idea.
That was
hey, real quick question, Rob. I was just thinking, kind of going back to the first encounter, and it walked across kind of diagonal. Did you guys hear it? Did you hear anything at all before you saw it, or do you think you were? I guess that's my main.
No, question. There was no sound at all. That one. The reason, you know, we came up to that mud puddle and it was right in our way, and so of course, you know, we're looking at the puddle and it's right there. It was too close to miss, you know.
Okay, and it went into the forest. Could you hear it? Could you hear any twigs or anything once he got into the
no
trees?
Absolutely no sounds, no nothing. But you know, it'd been raining for like 30 days straight, and then we finally got a sunny day or a partially sunny day, and the ground's pretty soft up there, you know, with all the debris on the forest floor. It's on, you know, pine needles and stuff like that. So it's pretty soft. And when the ground's soaked, there's no crunch to the leaves or anything. So, yeah, there was no sound at all.
Right.
Hey, Rob, I have a question real quick. Can you go into a little bit more detail about how you said it was, how you thought, maybe not at the time, but you think in retrospect it was actually hiding its tracks? Because that's something that we've heard before, but can you go into detail about what you mean by that?
Well, it was walking inside of the rest of the road, and they were filled with water. So there was no, you know, you would have had to wait for the water to go away, and Valsets, that would have been probably, you know, 6 months before the water was actually, you know, gone enough to look inside the ruts, you know. So it's, yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's interesting, though. Yeah, I mean, it shows you how clever they are.
Exactly. Yeah. They're kind of above when it comes to certain things. I think they're rather extraordinary. The more you learn about them, the weirder it gets.
Well, Rob, I got to thank you, and again, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It's very interesting, and we hope to have you back on.
Absolutely, anytime. Yeah, that would be fun. I would sure love to take you up there if you're in the Willamette Valley area.
I will. I was thinking about that. I may get a hold of you, and you know, when the weather gets a little nicer, and yeah, well, I'd love to. I'd like to go up there and visit the area. That'd be great.
That'd be great. Yeah. So I appreciate you guys having me on and hearing my story, and a great show. You guys do a service for the community. It's really therapeutic for people, and this is really my first opportunity to just let it out and not be concerned or try to read their body language to see if they're thinking I'm an idiot or whatever. You know how that goes when you try to convey your story to somebody who isn't interested. It can be disheartening and discouraging.
Thanks, Rob. We really appreciate it, and we'll have to have you on the Q&A.
Absolutely, that'd be fun.
All righty, good deal. Welcome back from the break, everyone. We have our good friend the judge with us on this segment. Fellas, hope we have lots of questions. We'll just kind of take the discussion wherever it leads.
Sure. Tom, do we have any listener questions, first of all?
Yeah, we sure do. Actually, we got some real good ones. So this one is directed for whoever wants to take it, but it's actually a really good question. One of our listeners wrote in and wants to know, when Bigfoot gives birth, is there an umbilical cord, birth sac? How do they deal with that? And that's, I think, a good question. I don't know if we have the answer, but
I mean, as far as being a mammal, I'm sure they have all that, the apparatus, that most mammals do. So, as far as that question goes, what do they do with the afterbirth? I have no idea. We don't have anybody that's ever seen that, as far as I know.
Well, what about other primates like gorillas and chimps?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. I don't really know. I'm not familiar with that particular aspect of what other primates do. I guess we could look it up, I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't think they go into the ER, so...
no, not likely.
they got to have some way to deal with this. So, very, very good question.
It is a good question.
Here's another one, and this, I got to thank our listeners for these, good questions. This has to do with if you have a Bigfoot on your property, and obviously you want to get rid of it. It's a problem. This person has heard that bright lights and cameras will tend to make him back off. He wants to know if fake cameras would kind of fake him out, so to speak, and still ward them off. Any thoughts on that?
Well, if it's on your property, anything that's, within kind of the human, aspect, like their fencing, outbuildings, proper home, things like that, anything you put up there, they're going to expect that that's from you. If it has an IR light source, that'll keep them away. Even if it is a fake camera, you still need that IR light source. Cutting back brush at least 50 feet away from your home, that helps because they like to use that as cover in their approach. So cutting that back, the bright lights occasionally, motion sensors. Not doing observable patterns that are the same throughout a 24-hour time period. In other words, if you get up and you leave for work at exactly the same time every day, they're going to take note of that. Regular behavior. So you need to break up those routines a little bit and do some random things. That helps, offset what they do.
Well, out of all of those, what do you think is probably, I would say my money would be on maybe cutting back the trees, but what do you think is the most single deterrence?
Well, it seems that they steer clear of IR light sources. That's why game cameras don't work.
Okay.
Hey, well, I have a question. We often talk about how when two groups come across each other, it may be kind of a territorial dispute. In other words, it might be rivals. But in the past, like a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, remember we heard those audio noises where, and you kind of theorized that it could have been two groups kind of yelling at each other. And my question is, though, at some point, these creatures have to mate, right? So, what are your thoughts on that about if two groups come across each other, are they always going to be, are they rivals for a short period of time and then they maybe come together and view each other not so much as enemies, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, other primates will usually, if a suitor, it can't move up within the ranks in that group to mate, then they'll split off for a time and go find mates elsewhere. And I'll give you an example in southern Washington with the area that I studied for over a decade. You had two main groups that weren't really close to each other. And there was a group of 3 males sort of wandering around in that area in between. And we do know that occasionally one or more of those males would temporarily join with one of those other groups. So I'm guessing it was probably for mating because it wasn't a real long time before they'd be off on their own again. So that's probably what they do. Or at times a female could leave a group, if there's no male suitors in that group, and they may start other groups that way. I don't know if that answered the question, but
Yeah, it does. But that is kind of interesting because, you have to figure that probably one group is inevitably going to come across other groups throughout its 500-mile.
And it's typically not a real aggressive nature between them. I mean, they'll, they do their territorial noises and things or behaviors, but one of the alphas is going to be more dominant than the other one. So that usually settles whatever dispute there is.
Right.
All right, so I got a question from one of our viewers. He wants to know if, do they perspire? Do gorillas perspire, and do we think Bigfoot will, especially if they're chasing prey, would they perspire?
Yeah, I would suppose so. I mean, I don't think their systems are that much different than ours. I don't know that for 100%, but we can ask our anthropologist about that.
Yeah, and we haven't really found one to run alongside of it and see what's going on during the hunt.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, actually, kind of another question on that note about them running. When you come across tracks, not just you, but the ones that you found and that you've come across in your research, when they're walking, you would probably say what their average, the distance between each print is maybe, 5 or 6 feet generally?
Around 50 inches or so.
Okay, but what about when they're running? What's the difference between that and the prints that you get?
Well, I think it would be pretty obvious that the spacing would probably be, I don't know if it's double that, but it'd be considerably more, if they're running.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, because most of the time the patterns that you find that have been found through history have been them walking.
Typically
right?
walking, yeah.
But how often do you come across patterns where you know that they were there and they were running?
Well, not real often. I mean, not that they don't do it. It's just that I know in my own case, I haven't seen a lot of running. I've heard them on pavement, with bare feet slapping, but of course you're not going to get any markings showing what the spacing is.
Mm-hmm.
Or in thick brush where you really can't get in there and measure. I've heard that too, but it's usually very difficult because there isn't the kind of soil there where they can leave those markings clearly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, here's another question. Aside from maybe physical differences, have you come across any differences between males and females in terms of characteristics or habits or anything like that, or anything that you've heard or read about?
Not typically. Of course, we're just seeing, small windows when there's reports of sightings, so the behaviors are not notably different. So, unless you were able to observe them for long time periods, you wouldn't be able to discern any of those differences. There may be, but we're not in a position yet to record that kind of thing.
Right. But I mean, some things that you can say are pretty obvious, like probably the alpha male is going to confront the family or the human beings that are in the area. The alpha male is probably going to come out first, right? Probably going to show itself first.
Not typically. With other primate species, the submales are the ones that will present themselves first, and the alpha will hang back. And it seems to be the case with this too. Now, when you talk about male-female behaviors, there is one story that kind of sticks out in my mind, and just the portions of it that relate to that kind of behavior where the witness said there was a male, a female, that was obvious due to its physical attributes, and then a very small one, Probably only a few years old, and the female kept its body between the male and this young juvenile the entire time they were around. Now, that kind of indicates that maybe the male was not the parent of that juvenile, and in the wild, animals that aren't, the parent of that juvenile will sometimes kill them. So that was kind of I think a uniquely female attribute.
So she was protecting the young one from the
male.
Alpha male?
Well, we don't know if it was an alpha. It was just a male that was with that individual.
Okay. But now, why would the sub-alpha show itself first when coming across humans?
Well, it's not just humans. And when you look at other primate species in the wild, they do that typically. It's kind of a routine behavior. And it could be a way of trying to impress females, a way of moving up the ranks, by showing their bravery.
Oh, okay.
But the alphas typically aren't the ones that will go out first. The sub-males will be the ones that will go out first.
That's interesting. Maybe they're using them as bait almost?
No, like I said, I think it's just their way of kind of demonstrating or trying to position themselves in the group, because all primates are hierarchical, and within a group, each one has its own position, and that's kind of a way of moving up, is by demonstrating that you're bigger and badder and tougher and all that stuff.
Gotcha.
It could also be a way of teaching these male juveniles how to respond to people.
Yeah, exactly. Sure.
Get them out front, to teach them this is what you do. There's been a lot of stories where they find the males, these young males out, and then they're corrected and they're brought back. That always seemed to be very interesting to me. Let me follow through with something. Well, one aspect of these things that I've often found very interesting, do you put any credence in these encounters that we hear of where the Sasquatch exhibits benevolent behavior? There's a lot of stories where there was a miner who had a kind of a arm's length relationship with one of these things, became very sick, deathly sick, and claimed that it carried him out to a road 20 miles or so. And there are other accounts like that. Do you have a tendency to dismiss those or accept them?
Well, when you look at the vast bulk of encounters, the stories don't lend themselves to that kind of behavior. Does it exist? It's possible, sure. I think in a case like that, I would have to be on the location and really know something about the behaviors of that particular group, because, the alphas, they sort of project what their personality is like on their group, so that's sort of the way the groups behave. If one has a predisposition for, more benign behavior, that could be, a lot of the times, most of the time, it's usually fairly aggressive kinds of behavior, so they'll either be aggressive or they'll steer clear of humans. But could it exist? Sure. Just requires a lot more study.
Mm-hmm. Kind of on the same note, it just made me wonder, are there any encounters with non-Sasquatch, any other type of wildlife that shows, sort of a nurturing or benevolence towards another species? Wouldn't have to necessarily be a human, but you hear these stories where talking about humans, babies are lost in the woods and they're raised by maybe some other animal. Rare instances. Just wonder if you've heard any credible stories like that.
Yeah, I think that would be the way to look at it, is to compare what other species have done. And usually it is a rarity. It's not the typical norm, because if there's an infant of any kind in the wild, usually predators, that's one of their things that they take advantage of very quickly. Could it be different? Sure.
Hey, well, I want to just talk about that point that you just made about if there's an infant that of that Alpine. Let's kind of reverse the tables a little bit. What if there were not necessarily an infant, but let's say a young Sasquatch, like a real juvenile Sasquatch, and it was on its own, perhaps. Maybe it drifted away from its family, not permanently, but just maybe was out there, and it came across a pack of like wild animal. I'm thinking particularly coyotes. Would they dare hunt? And because they could probably, as a team, they might be able to kill one of these things, but would they even dare try it, or would they know that, hey, mom and dad and others from the group are around?
Well, all predators are opportunistic. So if the opportunity presents itself, sure. I mean, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't attempt it.
But would they know that there are other Sasquatches around and that maybe they'd, or would they just kill it and then...
I don't think most predators consider that unless they have, primate's intelligence. They do what they do. I mean, they do it with humans. Even though, they may know or, at some level that we are very dangerous. But if the opportunity presents itself, they'll take it.
Well, also, just to kind of follow up on that, too, do you think that it's possible that these, like adult Sasquatches, maybe use infants or juveniles as bait, not necessarily that they want them killed, but just to kind of draw predators in and then they can counterattack them?
I don't think so. I mean, they have other ways of, hunting and getting their food, but, kind of going back to that point, I remember seeing things about grizzlies where a male grizzly, won't hesitate if, a mother grizzly and its cubs are around. If it has the opportunity, it'll kill the cubs.
Right now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a common feature in nature. So, would predators take that opportunity? Sure.
What's interesting about this is the comparison between primates and mammals. And there seems to me to be such a big distinction there. A lion, how it hunts, how it thinks, as opposed to a primate with a higher degree of intelligence. A grizzly bear will kill a cub on many occasions so it could breed with the sow again, as opposed to a food source, which is kind of another benefit, I guess. But on the other hand, you have lions and other types of animals which really, can you put them in the same, can you compare them? That's what I'm looking at. Can you compare a mammal and how an animal reacts as opposed to a Sasquatch, which has these primate features and apparently a greater degree of intelligence?
Well, first of all,
I don't know if that's a good...
Well, first of all, primates are mammals. So we're all part of the same grouping there. But primate intelligence across the board is far superior to any other animal on the planet. I know lots of people like to compare whales and dolphins and dogs and all kinds of animals and they are very intelligent, but there's a huge gulf of difference when you're talking primates. So there's an added component. They have very similar kinds of behaviors as predators, but there's that added component of high intelligence.
Do you think that a Sasquatch is on the top of that intelligence scale?
Pretty close. Pretty close.
Yeah.
Obviously, there have been no studies, but just the manner in which it hunts,
yes,
apparently think.
Yes, there's
I keep going back.
There's definite calculations.
I keep going, yeah. This Sasquatch that went to this guy's house after he quit feeding him, I find that to be one of the more fascinating stories because
it ticks him off.
Sasquatch, he was and that's a characteristic of a person.
Yes.
To hold a grudge, You can see an animal get mad if you wound it, if you do something stupid. A bear, they'll get mad. But to calculate, to wait till a person comes home and go into their home at night, that's a level of intelligence that is so superior. I heard a story the other day of a 13-year-old boy who went out in the woods, and he was building a fort. And he got back, it was on his property, his own property, and we went quite a ways back, and he saw this structure. He didn't like it, so he tore it apart and started building his own fort. And he went back the next day, it was gone, torn to shreds. So he put it up again, and he went back out, and it was torn up again. So he thought in his infinite wisdom that he would do what other animals do, and he went home and got some ammonia. And he went back and he poured this ammonia around the brand new structure that he made. And the next time he came out, it was like a tornado went through. The trees were snapped. It was just an absolute disaster in there. Well, he decided it's time to go home. And it followed him out, and it followed him to his home. And he broke into a run. It tore his shirt. It scratched his back. And obviously he had to get into the house, and then it proceeded to, for weeks, bang on the walls and look in the windows. And that, to me, it shows an exhibition of extreme intelligence, a grudge, which I don't see in any other type of animal.
No, and a couple of things on that. Had it meant to kill him, it would have killed him. Just chasing him. It could have run him down very easily. So what he was doing in that location was something that it was important to them in that place. And
that's right.
And he disturbed that. So there was a back and forth exchange, and he lost because it pissed him off. And instead of just leaving it alone, he had to persist. And then that was sort of their way of reinforcing, you need to stay out of that.
and that emphasizes their intelligence. He could have killed the kid easily. Mm-hmm. But it shows restraint, and it also shows a high degree of vendetta.
Yes.
For coming and looking in the windows. Maybe it's a Sicilian Sasquatch. I don't know. But coming back to the house, looking in the windows, banging on the walls, with the intent to cause anxiety.
Yes.
To me, that just escalates the level of intelligence of these things.
And Tom, you and I looked at some videos of gorillas and chimps, and I think we saw some similarities there, didn't we, recently?
We did, and I wanted to kind of weigh in on this. I saw a documentary recently on Siberian tigers, lengthy documentary. It's really interesting, and they had a similar type of grudge that they would hold, and the residents, the people that lived in this area of Siberia knew it. Some guy had, and there was this, huge, particularly large tiger that for whatever reason they were trying to deal with it. It was coming into the village and all that sort of thing. And so somebody had shot it. So it was wounded, but it wasn't killed. And later they did kill it. It had paws the size of dinner plates. The thing was huge. But this guy had shot it, and he went over to somebody else's cabin, and I believe he went to this other guy's, and he lived away from this village. He lived in a separate area. And I believe he went there because that guy was like an expert tiger hunter. And he told him what he had done and what had happened. And the expert tiger hunter told him, said, get out, get away. He was afraid because he understood that tiger now was going to associate him with this other guy. And this tiger went out of its way for a long time to exact revenge. You would think that a smart animal would say, hey, these things are capable of wounding or killing me. I'm going to just go elsewhere. But it doesn't. It went out of its way to exact revenge. Ultimately, they had to, all the villagers had to pool their resources together, and they neutralized it. They shot it. But the interesting part was the guy that was the expert on this. When the person who shot it, he recognized that this tiger knew who that person was, and he knew when he went to his home that now the tiger was going to make the association between those two, and he would double up on his efforts. He would go after that guy, and he would be hanging around, that cabin to exact revenge on that guy. And I thought that was kind of interesting. If tigers do that, these things probably do too.
Well, and we think we're so different, but really, as far as our place in the natural world, we're like that too, very commonly. So.
Oh yeah, worse.
Worse, yes.
By the way, for the listeners, I'm 100% Sicilian, so I can say that. If anybody's going to get their back up, they can come to me.
That's right. You know people, right?
That's right. I know my family. It's not hard to have a family reunion. We just look up the roster of all of my relatives in federal prison.
Yeah. Tom, just to kind of, you were saying, there's a story. They did a movie back in the 1990s called Ghost in the Darkness, and it's about these two lions. Yeah, these two lions. It is based on a true story, but the point is that, these lions were also very intelligent, and they were kind of playing games almost, mind games almost, with the people. I think this was in South Africa. That it took place.
Brian, is that the one that is the Lions of Tsavo?
It could be.
Where
that's they were built railroad.
Yes.
Yeah. They were clever. Yeah. They had exhibited what some of the workers thought were almost supernatural capabilities, which were, if you want to think in terms of supernatural, not that they were ghosts or spirits, but they were incredibly smart and very stealthy. They had super cunning abilities.
See, now that touches on something with the Sasquatch, because we hear people once in a while will put, supernatural attributes onto the Sasquatch as maybe their way of explaining what it is they see, when in reality, they have this very superb, as a predator, as an apex predator, ability to move and do things and be intelligent that might defy what a person thinks they should be.
One of the kind of following... No, let the Sicilian guy go first. No.
He'll make you an offer you can't refuse.
Yeah. All right. No, go ahead, Tony.
One of aspect of this that has always I've always questioned. We've heard of Sasquatch coming into towns, and people hearing them go through trash cans, and they look out their window and they see this figure there. A grizzly bear requires 5,800 calories a day. 58,000 calories a day to exist. I can only imagine that a Sasquatch at 800, 900 pounds would require an equal, if not greater amount. How would it be possible that they could obtain that type of caloric intake going through trash cans?
Well,
I've always scratched my head.
Here's the deal about that. These things will eat just about anything. The main source, of course, is going to be hunting, but as they, forage through their feeding areas, number one, they're opportunistic, and they will fill in, they will supplement their diet with just about anything. So, if there's trash around, sure, they're going to go through that. If there's vegetation in the area that's edible, they'll take that. The primary food source and caloric necessities are going to be animal protein. So all this other stuff, sure, that's all part of that. Now, one thing, let me clarify one thing about going into an urban area. And I talked with one of my sources recently, who I'm not going to name. He's just one of the folks that I talk to periodically about this stuff, and that's kind of an inside contact. He said that there are a number of things that have to be available for them to go into an urban setting. There has to be enough cover, brush. The access way has to be, sort of clandestine enough for them to avoid human contact. And it has to be a big enough draw for them to come in. So there has to be, a pretty good food source for them to wander into a place like that. So they're not just going to wander into any urban setting.
Right. Hey, Will, just to go back for a second about their intelligence, at what point did some of the historic researchers in the subject, like Green and DeHinden, at what point did they know just how intelligent these things are?
Well, having known those guys personally, I never really heard them talk that much about it. I think their belief was that they were simply an animal. They never really, or weren't willing to entertain the subject of intelligence. I talked to a couple of them about that, and they just didn't. They kind of shut down. They weren't really interested in discussing that aspect any more so than what a chimp or a gorilla would be.
Mm-hmm. But Will, I got a question that kind of along those lines. Don't we think that there's more evidence that this thing is? It's more than an animal. It's probably a hominid, which elevates it above the animal kingdom.
Basically, yes. It puts them in more of the same family grouping as us, as opposed to gorillas and chimps and monkeys.
Okay, so here's where I'm going with this, and I was kind of going with this, Tony, last time we talked, and it's just speculation, but if these things are hominid, okay, this would be the first time, and they got some kind of official recognition. Yep, they're there. This would be the first time in modern history that humans and hominid, some other hominid, coexisted, right? And the question I have is, if that was the case, would they get a different level of legal status? I guess would be a lack of a better word, some kind of legal status that's higher than something in the animal kingdom and almost on a par with us. If that makes sense. Or maybe it doesn't make sense.
He's thinking about it.
It's just there's so many variables involved in that. They would have to determine the degree of intelligence. There's such a thing called conflict of laws, where you can have two states or two countries that have a different law, and they have to determine which law is applicable, that type of a thing. But they would have to determine the nature and extent of the intelligence of the animal. They would have to, or the creature, whatever you want to call it. I just don't know if that can be answered. It's so far out in left field. I just don't know if there's an answer for it. I mean, you could just leave them alone and let them pursue what they have been pursuing with their own hierarchy and social structure, and let it be. I don't see how we could impose any of our laws upon them, or vice versa. I just.
Yeah, you're right. I think.
Well, here's one example.
I think once the endangered species kicks in, then there is that. Then all the the pertinent individuals get involved, and they have to study, and it could be many years before they could make any kind of determination. And it depends on what lawmakers choose from all that, what they're going to impose.
And then different states would have different rules and things like that.
Well, I think it would be under federal jurisdiction, something like that, because these things are all over the place. I don't think states would be allowed to really, unless they're going to, go above and beyond whatever the federal statutes that were placed on these things would be. But you're right. I think it would be advisable to keep a separation, let them do what they do.
One extreme example, what I was...
Go ahead.
Well, the extreme example I was thinking of is if somebody shot one of these things. If you illegally shoot any kind of game or non-game wildlife, you're gonna be prosecuted, but you're not going to be prosecuted for murder. And I'm just wondering if, and again, I think you answered the question already, that there would be a lot of study to determine just how close to the human family they are.
Yeah, but I think first of all, I think they're just going to go out and take a pot shot at one. They're probably not going to survive that encounter. So it's sort of a moot point there. You know what I mean? Especially trophy hunters or something think they're going to go out and bag one. Not going to happen, guys.
Maybe they have trophies of human heads.
Well, they're going to end up as a sack lunch. I mean, but yes, I mean, and sure. I mean, it could be a one-for-one thing. If you take one of them, they're going to take one of you. It's not something uncommon to humans.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe the Sasquatches have human head trophies.
It's very possible. We don't know. Kind of a scary thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that brings up another point. I mean, what if they're doing things like, more primitive cultures do, where, when you come of age, your way of proving yourself is to go out and you take down the biggest, baddest thing out there, which in their case would be us.
I heard of a couple of young kids that found a, quote, lair, unquote, and they went in this structure and they found clothing. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible. I mean, like I said, they're an apex predator. They're opportunistic. If the opportunity presents itself, well, sometimes it's worth the possible risk.
Well, just to back up for a second, so what you were saying before is that maybe a juvenile, to prove it can transfer over to adulthood, maybe would be sent on a mission, perhaps, to kill one of us.
It's possible, sure. I mean, we don't know that much about their social structure, and it's going to be very similar to the primates. And if they're a hominid, like I think they are, it could be an aspect of what they do.
And it could be a group by group thing too, where one group might have different social structure than the next group.
Yeah, I'm sure they vary.
Yeah.
And again, the alpha is going to impose its behavioral characteristics on the group. We see that with lots of other primates. An example was I watched a show some time ago, National Geographic, where one of the parts of the show they were looking at this group of baboons, and the first leader was kind of a bad leader, kind of ruled by force, which happens in a lot of these groups. Was very and there was one part where it was about to be eaten by an alligator, and the rest of the group sort of turned their backs like like go ahead, and which is not a dynamic typically of primate groups. They would sound the alarm if they all saw the alligator and the leader didn't. So they were almost on purpose letting this happen, and of course the leader didn't get killed. He did later, and one of the sub males that was being picked on by this particular leader ended up taking over, and the entire behavioral structure of the group changed from one leader to the next. So if that can happen with baboons, it happens with gorillas and chimps, I'm sure it can happen with these things too. And even our behavior is the same way.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine a scenario where maybe there's a group and there might be, let's say there's a group of, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6, and you have the alpha male and then maybe the sub males, and maybe for whatever reason they want to kick one of the sub males out. Maybe the alpha male wants to kick the sub male out, and they just kind of turn their backs on them and say, "Hey, you're on your own now"?
Oh, I'm sure when the alpha wants a member out of the group, they're out. They're either out or dead. And going back to a little bit on that deal too, comparing behaviors, with the leaders and all that. Here's something to think about. Human species have been around with these things for a long time. Many, many, many generations, long before recorded history. We've just chosen in recent times, the past couple thousand years, to forget about these things. Yeah. The question makes me wonder the question, with some of these behaviors, like, kind of that coming of age thing, is that something that they would have observed and adopted watching us, or do we do that having watched them?
That's interesting. I never thought of that, but yeah, maybe they do watch us and try to imitate some of the things that they see.
Or did our ancestors get some of our behaviors from watching them?
Right.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Just a question for thought, for a little food for thought there.
Yeah. Okay, I guess to kind of switch topics a little bit, is there any evidence that one group, or one, I guess I should say, like, not necessarily one type, but do they in general live longer in certain regions of the country? Is there any evidence, do they live longer in the south where it might be warmer, or in the north where it might be colder? Or
at this point, there's no way of knowing until we, get a good long-term study, of particular groups, because, unless you can identify a specific individual over, whatever time period you're talking about, there's no way of knowing.
Do they know how long these things live on an average? Does anybody have that number?
I can check with my sources. They may have some idea, but I don't think there's any specifics. But if we have
hear people that see them, and then 20 years later continue to see what they feel is the same individual. I've often wondered if they have 30, 40, 50-year lifespan. 60.
Well, one thing we can do is we can look at comparative anthropology, and that's looking at gorillas and chimps, the larger primates, how long they typically live, and we're looking at 40, 50, maybe 60 years tops, depending on their environmental stresses. These things, being a hominid, could be longer. It all depends on their lifestyle and where they are and the conditions that govern that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question, though. Hypothetically, if they were to find a bone, and I guess this would be a question for the anthropologist, but if they were to find a bone, would there be any way to make a rough estimate as to how old that creature whose bone came from?
Yeah, we'd have to talk to our forensic anthropologist, John. I'm sure he could give us some specifics about that, but I think there is a way of telling, age by the bones.
They can do it with teeth.
Yes. Yeah, depending on the wear and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that they could do that with teeth, but that's interesting.
Yeah. We should get John on so he can discuss that in particular, because he would be able to address that very specifically.
Yeah. Because since most sightings occur in let's say colder climates like the Pacific Northwest, which is at least colder than like down here in Florida, it makes me wonder if maybe they're more sustainable in those types of climates as opposed to maybe southern Florida. Just because the number of sightings.
Well,
maybe
they've adapted, of course, because we look at how the varieties among the species, different variations adapt differently to their environment. So we have here, we have the muscular ones, the stocky ones, very thick, and that's an adaptation not just for mountainous terrain but for cold weather or colder weather. Get farther east in the plains, they're a little more slender, built for running, and a little better adapted to that terrain. You get in the south, and again, there are more adaptations. Some variations that make them more adaptable to that area.
Right. So probably in terms of how old they are, it might be the same throughout the regions of the country.
Yeah, I mean, I can only give one specific that I'm aware of, and that's the gray one we saw back in 1988. And the hunter that I spoke to said that he saw the same one. It came at the edge of their camp 17 years previous to that and looked exactly the same. So, given growth records through its juvenile years, could be somewhere between 10 and 20 years. You're talking a 40-year span and probably longer. So, it's a guess. It's a good guess, but it's still a guess with something we don't really know unless you track a specific individual over a specified amount of time.
Now, how did you know that it was the same one, though?
From the description. We chatted about what I saw and what he saw, and the descriptions matched very closely.
Okay. But speaking of cold climates, how many reports do you get, or have you gotten from Alaska?
There's a few. I don't have too many contacts up there, but I get reports from up there. But there's still more farther south.
Mm-hmm.
Do you reject the mountain giant theory, Will?
What's that now?
There's rumors, sightings of Sasquatch that are extra big. We're talking 15, 20 feet. I've heard reports of that from actually up here in Montana. There's a ghost town called Garnet, and up in the Garnet area, and then I've heard it in Alaska as well, and wondering if it's folktale or if there's any cause to think it's real.
Well, number one, it's not actually a Sasquatch, and I can't go into great detail because I have to go visit with Mr. Black here in the next few months, and he's going to give me some information. Apparently, they were aware of something like that. Superficially, they kind of resemble the Sasquatch, but they're something different. So what that is, I can't tell you.
I'll be a son of a gun. So
he says
there is a creature.
Yeah, I kind of stay away from subject. I stay focused on our guys here, but he did say that they were aware of something like that. Apparently, the normal Sasquatches are afraid of those creatures and steer clear of them, and there aren't as many of them. So, so that's something I'm going to kind of back away. I'm going to kind of back away from that subject because I can't speak in great detail on it.
Oh, no. You're not going to do that to me. You raise your right hand. Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give. I'm going to put you on the stand, Will. All right, I'll back off.
I'm just repeating what he told me. He's told me lots.
Oh, my eyebrows are raised. I didn't think you'd go there with that because you stay away from the woo-woo. But that's fascinating.
Well,
it
was something that when he was part of that project that they did know about, that they picked up images of them in Canada, which is typically where they are, but there aren't many of them. Right. So, but beyond that, I don't have any details.
Well, there's some up in the Yukon. I heard there's legends of the natives that lived up there, these huge things that even they said were not Bigfoot.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the natives
similar.
They were. Yeah.
Well, what's that valley up there? The Headless Valley.
Right.
They call it.
Right.
And there's the river. I can't remember the name of the river that flows through that thing. But we're talking about the same area. Yeah.
I believe so. Yeah. But even in eastern Canada was where my source told me. They had images of one or two of these creatures, but and again, we're not talking 25 feet tall, things like that, or higher. They're not too much outside of the range of the normal Sasquatches, but they are enough to make them something a different type of creature, and that's all I can explain. That's all he said. He said we have to talk in person so he can explain it.
Fascinating. I'll be darned.
Hey, well, just to kind of get back to, I guess, warm and cold climates for a second, to bring it back a little bit, besides physical characteristics, and actually this is kind of a two-part question because it's not just about warm and cold, but also between the types. Are there different characteristics? I'm not talking about physical characteristics and how they look, but I mean behavioral characteristics, the differences between those maybe in warmer climates compared to colder climates, and also the second part would be about the various types, like not physical characteristics, but behaviors that like one type does that another doesn't.
Well, I mean, it's obviously the food sources are going to be somewhat different. The vegetation is going to be somewhat different. Terrain is going to be different in these different regions where the different variations live. So, their behavior is going to be dictated by those factors. So there's going to be some differences, but it's mostly around in the pursuit of food. That's their main function.
Okay.
Now, there may be some other aspects that we still have to study. I'm not going to speak on those at this time. There's some things that we're going to be working on in the future, but that's for way down the road.
Okay.
Yeah, I got a question on their mortality. Do we have any information, or have you heard anything maybe from Mr. Black, or do you have any knowledge of how do they, if we walk through the woods, if we step over the wrong log at the wrong time, we might step on a rattlesnake or next to one and get bit. Any idea if these things have the same problem, and is their body maybe large enough to sort of absorb that venom, or do they have a way of treating it? Or I'm just curious, or have any of these things died from snake bites?
Well, we don't know. We don't have any reports like that, but I'm sure, their hair's pretty thick, and I've seen that up close, so I think a snake would have pretty difficult time biting through that. And I think typically, a snake, when they feel the vibrations on the ground, when something's approaching, usually they'll steer clear of it. So normally I don't think they really have any problem with that. If they see the snake, they probably eat it, but
yeah.
But beyond that, I don't think.
And that brings up a.
I don't think they have the same problems we do with it, those kinds of things.
Yeah, and that brings up another point, and that is, we think that their bone and muscle density is considerably more dense.
It is
many times than ours. Yeah, so maybe that's just not an issue for them.
Well, and you have to ask yourself the question, where there's deer and elk and other, wild boars, things like that, in the same kind of terrain, what problems do they have with snakes?
Oh yeah,
and
right.
And I think the question is the same. I think the snakes are going to steer clear of them.
Yeah.
And the animals typically don't have trouble with them. If there's an occasional one, well, that's possible in nature, sure, but typically, I don't think so.
Yeah, I was just about to say, just as, cricket goes silent when they're around, I imagine snakes kind of have that same sense that to get away.
Well, it's heavy. I don't think it's a sense. I think it's they feel the vibrations of them approaching. Something that big and that heavy is gonna make a few vibrations in the ground, so
exactly.
They're going to stay away from that.
I was fishing up in British Columbia. There was a number of us. I was in a tent on the ground, in sleeping bag, and 3 or 4 grizzlies came into camp right next to my tent. I could feel them.
Yeah,
I could feel the footfalls.
Feel the footfalls, yeah.
Right through to my sleeping bag. And to this day, I remember that because I thought it was rather bizarre, but you could feel them walking around the tent.
Well,
so I got a question. Could they feel you shaking? They would have felt me shaking.
Did you say that these were grizzly bears?
Or no, but yeah, they were grizzlies. No, but they smelled the urine.
Well, I can tell you, as far as feeling vibrations, when I was in the Army, eons ago, we had a ground sensors that we could put out, and as a way of knowing if an enemy was coming in, sneaking in at night, it would pick up their vibrations. So it was an early warning system.
Pretty cool.
So sure, I mean, snakes, they're keenly aware of that. They don't want to be stepped on or anything, so they're going to steer clear of that kind of stuff when it's around.
Yeah. And plus, I don't think there are too many venomous snakes. Well, this is maybe naive, but I was just about to say, I don't think that there are too many venomous snakes in America. So I don't think the Sasquatch would have to worry about being bitten. But I don't know.
Well, if you're talking rattlesnakes, especially when you look at the Cascade Range, west of the Cascades, no, because it's too wet and cold. Snakes don't like that. But just east of there, lots of rattlesnakes.
Yeah. Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was hiking one time, and I was hiking up a little hill one time, and there's a perfect little cliff, little slot in the cliff you can just grab and just, kind of propel yourself forward. And I was literally a nanosecond from just sticking my hand in there, and something made me stop. And there's 3 rattlesnakes, and their head was the size of my hand, and they're moving their heads back and forth, and it just went, it didn't rattle, I just went tick, tick. And then instead of propelling myself forward, I propelled myself vertically about 10 feet, yelling. But yeah, so just often wondered if a Bigfoot had a similar encounter.
And typically, I can relate to a situation when I was fighting forest fire many years ago with the Forest Service. I was a squad boss in charge of half the crew, and we were sweeping an area for hot spots, and it was early in the morning, probably, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and there was a rattlesnake, and because they're cold-blooded, it wasn't very warm, so the snake was crawling very slowly, and we were all able to get pretty close to it and look at it and everything, and it just very slowly moved. So when you look at Sasquatch behavior, when they're typically hunting is at night. So when those temperatures are cold, the snakes are going to be in burrows and places where they're going to try to maintain some kind of body temperature. They're not going to be out crawling around or biting things because they're going to be moving much more slowly. So the Sasquatch probably has a lot less likely chance of encountering a snake or getting bitten than it would, say, midday.
Yeah. And also,
that's a good point.
Yeah, and not just with snakes though, but I would also say that like even insects, even like bees and wasps, because you know how bears will take a hive, and well, first of all, the bees really can't penetrate its fur, and I imagine probably the same might be true with Sasquatch. But even if they do, I'm not sure that it would really affect them the way that it affects, No,
and the Sasquatch doesn't have fur; they have hair, but it's thick enough where bees probably have very little effect on them.
Yeah, and even if they were stung, it wouldn't have the same effect as it would, say, a human.
Right, and and primates again are very, very aware of everything in their environment, so they're going to know where stuff like that is most of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't just bumble around, like some stupid creature. They like we are, right? We wander around and bumble around into things. The Sasquatch is very well aware of its environment, so they know what's out there and where they should be and where they shouldn't be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, any more questions, fellas?
Yeah, it's a good question, though, Brian. Well, I was just going to comment on that. I've just often wondered the same thing about how these things deal with the pests that we deal with. If you're in that Cascades, I imagine other parts of the country, you get out there in spring, early and midsummer. It's not just bees, but it is swarms of huge mosquitoes.
Oh,
I mean, they're up your nose or in your ears.
Ticks and all kinds of things. And I'm sure, I can remember, being in the field one year a few years back, and my buddy was with me, and I just walked through a field, and both of us got a couple of ticks on us just from the field grass. So these things, I'm sure, have, parasites like that get on them. But, You know, and like a lot of animals, they know it's certain. You see a lot of animals will eat certain grasses and things if they have, you know, stomach problems, and I mean even dogs and cats do that. So I'm sure they're instinctual behaviors that, you know, things that they might consume that would help them with, you know, problems with parasites and things.
Yeah.
Of course, they do eat garbage, so they must have a pretty stout system.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and speaking of that, I think you told a story one time where you saw some scat that had the whole bag in it.
It had a
plastic
like a clear
bag.
plastic bag like you get in the produce section in the store. It was all wrapped up in the poop, so they ate bag and all.
Jeez.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I don't think they have a very particular palate.
Yeah. Yeah. Apparently not.
Well, fellas, do we have any more questions or thoughts or discussion topics or?
There are a few questions, but we can save them for next time.
Oh no! If there's any questions, go ahead and ask. We get a little time yet here.
Oh, okay. Well, totally switch topics completely, but are there any encounters of them? And I'm sure there are, but because most sightings are of them, and they're very, very brief, right? But have there been any encounters or a lot of encounters of people seeing them actually eating like a deer, or besides garbage?
Yeah, I think we do have a few. Not a lot, but you know, once in a while you get usually it's a report of someone finding carcasses that they knew these things had killed, and I found things where I've seen them eat things. So, yeah, they're out there.
Right.
Don't we have reports of Sasquatch taking a game that has been shot by a hunter?
Oh yeah,
Rushing in, taking
quite a
it,
few of those.
and running away.
Yeah, quite a few.
That's not uncommon.
Yeah, there's the one I told, you know, quite a few times. The guy in southern Washington, he was the former Hells Angels enforcer. Him and a buddy were poaching. That would have been eastern Clark County, western Skamania County area. This was back in the 70s, he said. And they were on this road with switchbacks, and there was snow, and they shot a deer on the switchback above them. So when they drove up there, the deer was gone, and they saw the blood and the drag marks, so they followed the blood and drag marks up the road, and they saw this thing, you know, with its hand wrapped around the deer's neck, dragging it off, and they figured it was probably better to let the Sasquatch have the deer and to turn around and leave. But that's just one.
You know, that must have been well, I was just going to say, that's got to be kind of a double shock. You're not expecting, that'd be the very last thing you'd expect to see why your deer isn't there.
Yeah, I think that would be kind of a shock. and you know, coming from the source it did, and I was able to verify the guy's background because he had been in the news a few times in his past. So he was kind of a tough dude, big guy too, you know. And for somebody of his character to be actually frightened in that situation said a lot about it. So I didn't have any reason to not believe him at all.
The Grizzlies.
Is he the same guy?
I'm sorry. The Grizzlies up here in this area, they have a learned behavior now, and they will, if they're in the vicinity, they'll come to the report of a rifle.
I've heard that.
My hunting partner has been chased off an elk kill twice. Once by a boar, and the second time by a sow with a couple of cubs. So basically, when we're hunting up here, there's always a second guy standing there with his head on a swivel, doing the best he can to help out with cleaning the elk or the bear or the deer rather. But the grizzlies have learned that it means food, and they'll come and chase you right off.
I've heard that in Wyoming too. It's like ringing the dinner bell.
Yep.
So, you know, we've heard stories like that for many years with these creatures where I remember in one of John Green's books, I can't remember when the event happened, sometime in the 50s or 60s, There was a geologist and another guy on horseback, and they shot a deer. And before they could do anything with it, the Sasquatch come out of the woods near where the deer fell, grabbed it, and took off. And they were kind of in shock. But there are quite a few stories like that. And even an account where I interviewed a hunter one time in Skamania County, and I've told this before too, where he saw the Sasquatch. It actually did what the Creature in the Patterson film did, where it was walking along, it turned its body back to look at him, almost like, are you going to follow me? So he did follow it, and fortunately for him, he saw at least two other ones that were kind of in positions where it appeared to him they were hiding, and he felt like he was being led into a trap, so he made a hasty retreat the other direction and left. But so they do things while they're hunting, and certainly they know what the sound of a rifle means.
That brings up a real good question. If you're in a situation like that, or if you're in any kind of a situation, do we know of anything that would be a kind of a, maybe not 100%, but a good deterrence to ward these things off?
You mean
if you're out in the woods and you see one? Yeah, putting myself in that guy's situation, would there be something that I could do, like make a noise or have a bright light or something?
Well, I used Gerald's account was a good one, where I had spoken to him. He was our ex-police officer in Washougal that we talked to last year. And of course, I'm Gerald's friends of us, so we stay in touch periodically. But I had just spoken to him about, if you get in a situation where, you're either surrounded or not surrounded, but in a position where you think you're in danger, I said, one of the things to do is to pretend there are more people close by talking out loud and doing things like that. And there were 5 of them that surrounded him very quickly, apparently thinking he was an elk. So he was able to get, the 100 feet or yards, whatever it was, to his pickup by talking out loud, not running. You don't want to run because, predators will chase you. That's what they're kind of geared for. But he walked to his truck. He talked out loud like he was talking to other people close by that they couldn't see. And he just barely got out of that situation. So that's a big one when you're in that kind of environment. You have to pretend there are more people around than what there really are.
And I think Lee talked about that one time. He got himself into a situation.
Yep.
And he actually pretended he would talk and then answer back to himself in a different voice loudly. So it sounded like there's more than one person.
Yeah, and if you have a phone, that could even be something too. If you put it on speaker, if you're talking to somebody, or any sort of a thing that's going to make them second guess how many people are there.
Well, Will, just to kind of tie this back to what we were talking about before with intelligence, do you think that really fools them most of the time?
Well, a lot of times it does, sure.
Are they too smart for that, though?
Oh, no. You can bluff them. And that also goes if they happen to charge you. You definitely never want to run. You're not going to outrun one anyway, so there's no point in trying to run. Stand your ground. Call their bluff. And it really kind of throws a wrench in their behavior. It does the same thing with gorillas. If you have to stand your ground. And Tom and we watched some videos on that recently, too. Where the guy was, I'm sure he crapped himself with that gorilla come after him. And in the one video, he dropped the infant that he was holding, and the gorilla.
Yeah.
But he didn't run. He stood his ground, and the gorilla broke off.
He dropped a human infant?
No, a gorilla infant. He was holding an infant gorilla and was charged by one of them. So. He dropped it.
I was going to clarify.
he dropped it. It snatched up the infant and took off.
What was he doing holding an infant gorilla?
I don't remember, Tom. Do you recall if somebody handed him that infant or was it another gorilla?
No, he was a researcher. Yeah, I don't remember why he had it, but he had a infant baby gorilla, and I think it was he was a researcher, and this gorilla that charged him had known him and been around him. They knew each other for years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a very amicable relationship, but he said he knew if he so much as flinched in that situation that he would be dead. He would be gone. And I was just thinking, you and I, we watched it. It was the video. I'm thinking I would have crapped if it was a gorilla. If it's a Bigfoot, I don't know.
Well, and I've interviewed people that have been mock charged, and unfortunately, in each one of those cases, they didn't move. They were probably in so much shock. And I know one person actually said that. He says, I don't know why I didn't run. I think I must have been in shock. I was just stunned. I stood there. And to his benefit, the creature ran up to within 10 feet of him, and it stopped because he didn't move. And it called his bluff. And then, of course, my sources also tell me that, yes, you can call their bluff in many cases. So depending on what kind of behavior is going on, by being a little bold, sometimes you can cause them to break off whatever aggressive behavior they're doing. You don't want to go chasing after one, obviously, but, if you're in a situation that's not winnable, you're better off trying to be, dominant, so to speak, in that situation.
Go back for a second.
One, I don't think we know of anybody that's ever chased after one of these things.
No, because they wouldn't be around. They'd be put in the paper sack.
But so we don't hear from those people.
No, we don't.
Hey, but Will, how close do they get before they stop?
In the one case I mentioned, 10 feet.
Wow.
Yeah, he was petrified.
That's still pretty damn close. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that's 10 feet too close.
Now, there are some cases, where people come on them, and they're not unaware of your approach. Lady we spoke to recently, and I'm not going to say who she is because of her job, or describe too much of the situation. She came up on one that apparently was in some kind of a... You guys remember the lady we talked to that had the encounter in New Mexico where the creature was kind of on all fours making this weird walk across the highway, and her and her daughter saw it. This creature sounded like it was doing something very similar. It was early evening, not dark yet, but she couldn't. It wasn't daylight. She actually saw it and thought it was a bear with its butt in the air, and then it stood up and it was perfectly silhouetted against the light, ahead in the road, and it took a couple of steps and walked off. But so a lot of times they're kind of benign situations. Now, she didn't feel very comfortable, so she quickly left the area, not knowing if there were more in the area or what they were doing or if they were going to be aggressive. Very, very smart move. But, if you're in a situation where you don't think you can get out of it, obviously you want to get out if you can, quickly, because you don't know what they're going to do. But if you think you can't, then there are things you can do, like we mentioned talking out loud, or doing things that are going to, if it's night, lights and things like that. But the main thing is you don't want to get in those kind of situations or stay in those situations because they don't end well.
What do you think about the use of air horns as a deterrent?
I think that's a good one. That's one of the things I was told that seems to work. If you have an air horn, sure.
Yeah, because they're very loud and piercing, very annoying.
Yeah. It could buy you just enough time to get in that vehicle and get out of there. And that's what you want.
Yeah.
Infrared light sources. If you have something like that, by all means, utilize it. For whatever reason, they don't like
and
that.
And probably one of the things, well, what I've heard is, and we've talked about it, well, I think even on this show, is firearms are not your best choice.
No, and don't take a random shot at one because it makes them angry. And that could end.
But always remember to leave one round in the gun. Because if all else fails, you use it on yourself.
Yeah, the alternative is probably not good.
No.
What do you think about pepper spray if one, I'm just being hypothetical, one's chasing you and you think this is it?
Well, I would say bear spray. If it's a measure of
Yeah,
last
so I meant bear
resort,
spray.
then,
Yeah.
sure, shoot it in the face. But, don't just go out and randomly spray it around, because that seems to make them angry too. But if you had to shoot one in the eye if it was about to get you, then yeah. Well, fellas, do we have anything else? We're kind of at the end of our time here.
No, I think that's it for today.
Yeah, that's all I have for now.
Well, we'd like to thank our friend the judge for joining us this morning.
You bet. Happy to be here.
We're going to have you back with some witnesses to conduct some depositions, so that'll be interesting to have a professional, interviewing witnesses. So we're looking forward.
Well, I hope it goes better than the one I tried with you a few minutes ago.
I'm a little more slippery.
Yes, you are.
Well, fellas, great chat. We're looking forward to the next one, and folks, stay tuned for the next segment with Jim's readings.
Welcome. This story is being brought to you by William Jevning and is being narrated by me, Jim Sower. The name of this story is The Abominable Snowman by William L. Strauss, Jr. During recent years, stories have been coming out of India and Tibet about a giant mammal that lives above the snow line. According to some accounts, this creature is more than 7 feet in height, walks erect, has an ape-like head and face, and is covered with heavy blonde or reddish hair. The name Abominable Snowman has been given to the animal. The implication, of course, is that it is some sort of giant primate. Huge footprints in the snow, at heights from 10,000 to 21,000 feet above sea level, and attributed to the snowman, have been reported by a variety of people, including members of various Himalayan expeditions. From the latter source have come actual photographs of the footprints, which could pass for those of a large primate. Indeed, it has even been suggested, perhaps with more levity than seriousness, that the snowman may be no other than the giant ape Gigantopithecus blacki, persisting as a relic of the Pleistocene epoch in the seclusion of the Himalayas. This, of course, is at best no more than sheer speculation. As a matter of fact, Gigantopithecus itself is of decidedly uncertain status, being founded on 3 molar teeth, probably of Middle or Upper Pleistocene age, recovered from a Chinese drugstore in Hong Kong. In connection with the matter of identification, it must be emphasized that there is no record of any snowman ever having been captured either alive or dead or even photographed. Identification rests solely upon the footprints and verbal evidence. It must be admitted that the footprints do bear some resemblance to those of a primate. On the other hand, they could as well be those of a bear. This alternative is not as strange as it may seem offhand, for the general superficial resemblance of ursine and primate feet has long been recognized by naturalists and comparative anatomists. Wood Jones, in Hallmarks of Mankind, 1948, points out that the animal footprint most commonly mistaken for that of man is that of the bear. In this connection, he notes that the footprint of the mysterious orang pendek, once believed by both natives and Europeans to be that of some small jungle race of men, finally was proved to be the footprint of the Malayan bear. Furthermore, many bears readily stand erect and even indulge in bipedal locomotion on occasion. Consequently, the identification of the abominable snowman as a bipedal primate has been vigorously rejected by many zoologists and anthropologists. To most of them, a large bear seems a more acceptable and more plausible explanation. The question of the nature of the abominable snowman has been investigated by the Reverend Swami Pranavananda, Indian Geographical Journal, 30, 99, July through September 1955, who concludes that the animal is no other than the red bear of the Himalayas. According to the author, the snowman is known to Tibetans as Mitai, meaning man-bear. There are 3 varieties of bear in this region, black, brown, and red. The last of these is the Mitai, which is known to walk on his hind legs like a man. The author reports several accounts of the Mitai gathered from Tibetan eyewitnesses. A shepherd from eastern Tibet, whose sheep had been attacked by the animal at a height of 16,000 feet along the Kayangchu, a tributary of the Brahmaputra, stated that the Mitai, after first running on all fours, rose on its hind legs and departed following ineffectual gunfire from the shepherds. It was described as of about the height of a man and with light red or reddish-brown in color. A number of pilgrim nomads from northern Tibet identified the Mitai as the red bear and reported having encountered it at a height of 17,000 feet in the source region of the Kubi, a headstream of the Brahmaputra. According to another informant, a Mitai was seen by shepherds near Tomomopo on the Tag Sangpo, on the southeastern side of Manasarovar, at a height of 15,000 feet. At times it moved on all 4 legs, at others on its hind legs alone. When erect, its height was a little greater than that of a tall man. The body was covered by a thick coat of reddish-brown hair. The footprints, left on hard ground scantily covered by sand, measured 11 inches in length and 5 inches in breadth. Although the imprints of the hind feet had 5 toes, those of the front feet exhibited only 4 toes. The toes in general were of about equal length, approximately 1.5 inches. The little toes, however, were slightly shorter. 10 days later, when the shepherds had gone up valley to graze their sheep, they encountered footprints of the Mitai in the snow. These prints were considerably larger than those left in the sand, measuring 18 inches in length, with a corresponding increase in breadth. Furthermore, no traces of the toes remained. This was obviously due to the melting of the snow at the edges of the imprint after long exposure to the sun, with consequent enlargement of the entire impression. Pranavananda notes that footprints in the snow are subject to change in dimensions, deformation, and obliteration of details, such as impressions of toes, not only through the action of the sun, but also as a result of blizzards or strong winds. When crossing Kandasanglam Pass in 1941, he came across giant footprints. Kandasanglam is a pass east of Kailas, a holy peak. According to Tibetan tradition, it can be negotiated only by those pious pilgrims who have completed 12 circumambulations of Kailas by the regular parikrama route. Hence, perhaps only 1 or 2 pilgrims negotiate this pass in a year. It was ascertained that a lama had crossed the pass some 25 days earlier. His were the footprints encountered by the author. As a result of the warm July sun, the deep snow along their edges had melted away, producing a trail of greatly enlarged prints that were 21 inches long and correspondingly increased in width. It is not difficult to see, as the author points out, how a superstitious pilgrim might have readily described such footprints as those of a great 1,000-year-old Himalayan yogi, or as those of Hanuman, or some other legendary character. Indeed, they might have well been described as some Himalayan expedition as the footprints of an abominable snowman, or even by a credulous anthropologist as those of a prehistoric man. Nor is there any reason why the snow footprints of the red Himalayan bear might not suffer similar misinterpretation. According to Pranavananda, the red bear is not the only mammal that frequently makes excursions far onto the snowfields and glaciers, apparently chiefly in search of food. The wild yak, Tibetan wild horse, lynx, snow leopard, wolf, ibex, harl, guru, Tibetan antelope, musk deer, and Other animals do likewise, for vegetation can occur up to an altitude of 20,000 feet or more. Their footprints also can be so altered by sun, blizzard, and wind as to be capable of being misinterpreted. The author believes that the footprints reported by Eric Shipton as attaining the size of those of a young elephant were those of a snow leopard, or wolf magnified by melting of the snow at their edges. Some people, while not accepting the snowman footprints as those of a giant bipedal primate, have nevertheless regarded them as primate in origin, and have attributed them to the langur or black-faced Himalayan monkey. Pranavananda, however, rejects this interpretation, since the langur is seldom or never seen above the tree line, and hence does not wander on the snow. Moreover, he says langurs in the upper Himalayas move down to lower, warmer regions well in advance of the snowfall. Another probable factor in the creation of the abominable snowman legend is a linguistic one. The author notes that different persons have translated differently and sometimes grossly mistranslated the original local Tibetan words, designating the animal that has been identified as the abominable snowman. In this connection, it is so to be noted that most of the current snowman stories come from India rather than from Tibet itself. It appears likely that mistranslation of local Tibetan words by foreigners has been responsible for some misconception. The fact that the matter has not been thoroughly investigated on the Tibetan side of the Himalayas, where the local population has a correct knowledge of the identity of the animal, has helped perpetuate the wrong conception of the animal. According to Pranavananda's view, Mitai, which has been translated by some Himalayan expeditionists, is abominable, filthy, disgusting to a repulsive degree, dirty, actually means man-bear. Kangmi, or snowman, is merely an alternate word for the same animal. Hence the term mitikangmi, from which the abominable snowman represents an incorrect combination owing to mistranslation of two terms that are essentially synonymous. Thus the abominable snowman would seem, on the basis of the best evidence now available, to be no other than the Himalayan red bear. The matter, of course, cannot be conclusively settled until a specimen of the undoubted snowman is secured for study. From Science Journal 123, 1024 through 1025, 8th of June, 1956. The Abominable Snowman. Robert K. Enders. It is possible that the footprints that have been reported from the snows of the Himalayas as being those of the abominable snowman may have been made by several orders of mammals. W. L. Strauss, Jr., Science 123, 1024, 1956. In April 1953, tracks that looked like photographs published in several popular magazines as being those of the abominable snowman were seen by the writer along the snow-covered trail to Balistan, near Songamarg, Kashmir. Some of the tracks were old, and some were fresh. The fresh tracks were large, 4 to 6 inches wide and 10 to 14 inches long, and appeared to be made by a biped. In some of the fresher tracks, the imprint of the toes became more and more pronounced as one followed the track. And then the toes disappeared, and the tracks became larger. The bottom of the new and larger tracks showed a pattern like a rough weave, but within a few yards became smooth and free from any distinguishing marks. The tracks were made by men wearing snow sandals to protect their feet, not from the snow, but from ice crystals that form from thawing and freezing. These sandals were woven of a plant that seems to be much like the cattail Taifa. The plant grows in marshy areas and is cut in the fall and dried, but before it is too dry it is woven into crude sandals. These snow sandals are worn by the many inhabitants either because they are too poor to buy leather or because they belong to a Buddhist sect that will not use leather. The sandals first wear under the toes, so the imprint of the toes is clear in the snow. When the wear goes too far, the foot covering is discarded and the track changes suddenly. Discarded sandals were examined, but were not saved, for the abominable snowman was considered to be the product of the imagination of men who saw animal tracks that had been enlarged by the melting of the snow. Although the use of such snow sandals may be a local custom, it is quite possible that some of the tracks reported by explorers were made by men wearing the type of sandal described here. October 1957, Abominable Snowman, Lawrence W. Swan. Recent accounts, Science Journal 123, 10/24/1956, 126, 8/58, 1957, have given various interpretations of the abominable snowman or Yeti of the Himalayas. This note on the same subject is directed toward pointing out some aspects of the legend which have been overlooked. The interpretation that tracks in the snow ascribed to the Yeti may be made by man is valid in some instances, but it is clear that footprints cannot logically be attributed to even the most solitary hermit when they are made in remote glaciated terrain at great altitudes where local inhabitants simply would not travel. The explanation that the Yeti tracks are made by red bears raises a number of difficulties. The footprints, such as those photographed by Eric Shipton in 1951, 1. do not resemble bear tracks. Frequently, genuine red bear tracks have been attributed to the Yeti, but when photographs of these tracks have been examined, the bear origin has been clearly established. 2. Perhaps the greatest difficulty with the bear theory, and the point most often disregarded in statements concerning Yeti tracks, is the fact that the high-altitude red bear of the Himalayas, Ursus arctos isabellinus, is found only in the western Himalayas, whereas the origin of the Yeti legend and the source of all genuine Yeti tracks is in the eastern Himalayas. There is a fairly striking faunal difference between these two regions, and it is not legitimate, nor is it good zoogeography, to attempt to discredit the legend on evidence obtained from the western Himalayas or the plateau of Tibet. The abominable snowman presumably has no business in these parts. Prior to the advent of eastern Himalaya Sherpas into all sections of the Himalayas as members of the expeditions, the mountain peoples from Kashmir to Kulan had apparently never heard of the Yeti, although they have many other legends. In the eastern Himalayas, from the Everest area through Sikkim, residents of the high valleys continually describe the Yeti. In Sherpa, Ye means high rocky places, Ti or Te, or the means a sort of being, perhaps a dwarf but not necessarily a bear, as a bipedal creature with reddish hair, varying in height from 4 to 6 feet. Their description fits, in many ways, a bipedal ape, although these people should have no certain knowledge of apes. It is improbable that the Sherpas, who are fine observers and who have a good acquaintance with bears from their frequent travels of Tibet, would repeatedly confuse a bear standing on its hind legs with the Yeti, which they describe. Furthermore, in the high valleys of the eastern Himalayas, there are no reports of the bears. The forest bear, Selenarctos tibetanus, has not been reported above tree line, much less at 19,000 or 20,000 feet. It is conceivable and possible that the bear of eastern Tibetan Plateau, the so-called blue bear, Ursus arctos pruinosus, may occasionally cross over the main crest of the eastern Himalayas, but if so, this migration has not been reported, and the observant Sherpas deny it. Essentially, there is a problem of interpretation involving footprints, which, although they do not resemble bear tracks and are bipedal over a considerable distance, unlike single or overlapping bear tracks, are alleged to be caused by bears in localities where bears are not known to exist. That the tracks, or at least the sources of the legend, may stem from Himalayan langurs does not seem likely or pertinent. These forest monkeys are well known to the mountain peoples, and the Yeti footprints can scarcely be confused with Langer tracks. That the unique footprints may be the result of the high-altitude effects of evaporation and sublimation is not borne out by fresh Yeti tracks, where some detail of the foot is clear. High-altitude footprints do enlarge and may alter in shape, but this obvious alteration, which may surprise the casual traveler from the lowlands, is promptly recognized by individuals with experience in snow at high altitudes. It is not correct to assume that only the naive have seen the tracks, and it is equally erroneous to assume that the Yeti is the only imagined maker of all sorts of ablated footprints. There has been a curious silence in the scientific literature concerning the two unusual scalps found in separate monasteries in the Khumbu region of eastern Nepal. A mammologist of the Zoological Survey of India, Biswamoy Biswas, has examined the scalps, and it has been demonstrated that they are not artifacts. 3 photographs of the scalps are quite remarkable in that they indicate a somewhat conical occipital extension, as if the skull possessed prominent temporal and nuchal crests. There is, in the scalps, the distinct suggestion of a large anthropoid ape. Coincidentally, the footprints photographed by Shipton closely resemble a cast of a foot of the mountain gorilla made by Carl Ackley in East Africa. 4. This cast, which was made on a dead specimen, exhibits a prominent hallux somewhat proximal to the remaining toes, and perhaps more adducted than it would be in life. The line of toes arches in a slight semicircle, with the 5th digit close to and somewhat beneath the 4th digit, so that it could be inconspicuous in a footprint. The sole and heel of the foot are broad, with the lateral and medial borders approximately parallel. The general outline, the relationship of the hallux, the position and angle of the toes, and the inconspicuous 5th digit strongly suggest the Yeti footprint. Indeed, there are no other footprints which can approach the likeliness of the Yeti track. Although it is true that foot impressions in the snow are open to wide subjective interpretation, it would seem to be a conservative assumption that the Yeti track, as it appears in good photographs, resembles Ackley's gorilla cast much more than it does any normal footprint of a bear. In addition, there are reports of reversed knuckle prints, such as might be made by an ape, and, in fact, there are all sorts of tenuous indications from various Yeti tracks which can be interpreted to point toward the ape origin of the footprints. Among the apes, the mountain gorilla sometimes inhabits relatively high altitudes. Its presence on snowfields has been recorded in an alpine ecological zone not unlike that found in the Himalayas. The zoogeographical status of the eastern Himalayas as an area where relictual genera are frequent suggests that the existence of a relictual high-altitude ape with relatives in the tropics of Africa and southern Asia is not an illogical supposition. Similar distributions are found among other mammal groups, which at one time were widespread in Asia. Whereas it is perhaps presumptuous to assume, at this time, that the Yeti is in reality some large anthropoid ape, it seems that this possibility has not been eliminated or sufficiently considered in the current arguments of the Yeti critics. References: 1. E. Shipton, The Mount Everest Reconnaissance Expedition, 1951. 2. F. S. Smythe, The Valley of Flowers, Norton, New York, 1949. 3. The Statesman, Calcutta, 4th of March, 1954. 4. C. Ackley, Gorillas, Real and Mythical. Response by William L. Strauss, Jr. I certainly have never denied the possibility of the existence of an abominable snowman, whether it be a giant ape or some other unknown creature. I am only adhering to a basic tenet of scientific procedure when I ask for something in the way of positive proof of its reality. Unfortunately, those who claim to have seen the snowman seem never to have a rifle at hand, nor even a camera. Inference and argument are entertaining and admittedly suggestive, but the real proof of the pudding is in the eating thereof. Collateral evidence, such as footprints, is subject to diverse interpretations. In this connection, I cannot help but recall the Orang Pendek and the Loch Ness Monster. If someone supplies me with the cadaver of an undoubted snowman, I will be only too glad to dissect it and report, to the best of my ability, on the creature's zoological affinities. Until such proof of its existence, or other proof which is just as convincing, is at hand, I reserve the right to be skeptical. Of particular pertinence in this instance is the observation of W.K. Brooks that suspended judgment is the greatest triumph of intellectual discipline. Published in Science 127, 882 through 884, April 1958. This is the end of the story. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.